Litquake, San Francisco's literary festival. I'm Sophia Cross from Litquake staff, and this year we are so excited to bring you 2.5 weeks of programming, stretching from October 9th, I don't know what that was, 9th to the 25th, with 150 events and more than 500 authors. So, yeah, give it up. We are just now ending week 1 of our programming, but we still have 1 more week to go, and you can see everything we've got in store in the festival guides that you received on your way in. So make sure you make plans to see us again. Tonight, we are honored to present Unbound Translations, a listening party with Cuentero Productions and Two Lines Press. Woo! This event is part of Words Around the World, Litquake's program series of international literature. And a special thanks to Center for the Art of Translation for helping make this event possible as a festival sponsor. Woo! Yes. We love both cats and cat, all caps. So before we get started, I have just a few quick housekeeping things, and then we'll get going. Litquake is a small nonprofit, and we rely on individual donors to present our annual festival and year-round events. We thank you for purchasing a ticket to tonight's event and your support of the Litquake organization. As you can see on the back cover of your program book, ticket sales only cover a tiny % of the cost of producing this festival, and we're very proud of the fact that more than 80% of our events each year are free and accessible to all. As you probably know, many sources of funding for programs like ours are in jeopardy or have already been eliminated. We hope that the events we offer create hope, belonging, and a sense of community centered on the written word. And if you support these shared values, please consider making a donation on your way out. You can use the QR code displayed at the box office and on the back of your program, or leave a few dollars in that beautiful shiny silver bucket. All right, surveys. You may or may not have noticed the surveys on the seats as you came in. They were not on all the seats because I didn't bring enough, but if you go to any other Litquake event, I promise you, you will get a survey. Please fill them out and hand them to our volunteer, Alicia, who is wearing a Litquake shirt. She's in the back, she's waving. And she's so excited to take your surveys. They are completely anonymous, and we do rely on the information collected in these surveys to apply for grants, so please do fill it out. The stories you'll hear read aloud tonight are from Two Lines Press collections that will be for sale by local indie bookstore Medicine for Nightmares. Woo! After the performance, so make sure you swing by their table. And now I'm just going to list a whole bunch of names, so please bear with me. We want to thank this year's major festival supporters, Lisa Brown and Daniel Handler, the Hawthornden Foundation, Margaret and William R. Hurst III Foundation, Minor Anderson Foundation, and San Francisco Grants for the Arts. Thank you to our media sponsors, KQED, KEXP, KALW, 48 Hills, SF Arts, Mission Local, Cityside, Johnny Funcheap, 7x7, Publishers Weekly, and Substrate. And last but not least, thanks to Counterpulse for hosting us and co-presenting this event with us. And now, I'd like to introduce our MC, showrunner, host, whatever you want to call him for this evening, Camilo Garzón. Camilo is a Colombian-American writer, award-winning poet, award-winning multimedia producer, and interdisciplinary artist. Garzón received an inaugural San Francisco Foundation Nomadic Press Literary Award for Poetry in 2021 for his epic poem Entombed and his directorial work on The Mission Realismo Audio Zine Volume 1, earned a Signal Award in 2023. Garzón has also been an artist in residence at Elsewhere Studios. And as the founder of Cuentero Productions, he consistently pushes the boundaries of storytelling through diverse literary and multimedia projects with creative partners such as the Center for the Art of Translations, Two Lines Press, Cineola, and Bonis Poesia. All right, let's give it up for Camilo.
Неужели октябрь? Какая теплынь! Ведь когда бы не мышь листопада, можно было бы просто забыть обо всем и часами глядеть в никудали и нюхать полынь.
Is it really October? Such a balmy air that if not for the rustling of leaf fall, one could simply forget about everything and for hours stare into far nowheres.
And smell sagebrush. One has to live, to act, to go on. Worry about the presence of kindling. One has to sew new squirrel slip-ons, stockpile mushrooms, and go hunting. Inasmuch as winter is certain, it's beginning. So the first language you heard there was Paruski, was Russian. The second language you heard there, of course, it's English. That was Piat, note 5, in a book that we'll talk about in a second, and it is indeed October. We happen to have the balmy air of the Bay Area that led us here. Or as the Russian and English voices you heard would remind me over the years, it's not the air, but the only thing that exists and pushes us, the wind that leads us anywhere. It is a clip in Russian and English from a 2017 NPR All Things Considered interview with Russian-Canadian author Sasha Sokolov and his translator and friend and my former teacher, the Polish-American polymath Alexander Boguslawski. I pitched that interview. I didn't produce it at NPR. The reason is that I had a personal relationship with both of these fellows, and ethically, of course, I couldn't do it. I was too close to the subject matter. And Sokolov and Boguslawski were reading from that book, originally written in Russian and published in 1980. The book was deemed untranslatable until Boguslawski came along and worked on it for decades. In Polish first, but then in the English language. See, the title of the All Things Considered piece was Translating the Untranslatable Between Dog and Wolf. And the book in question, Между собакой и волком, comes from an idiom about twilight, ambiguity, and uncertainty, like the times that we're living in right now. Popularly used in Eugene Onegin by Alexander Pushkin. Pushkin is a writer that died in 1837 after a duel, like used to happen back then. There are 18 chapters in this book by Sokolov and 37 notes or poems inside of this untranslatable novel. The coincidence between 1837 and the 18 chapters and 37 poems is absolutely intentional. Note 5, October, is synchronistic for us in many ways, as it is in chapter 5 of Eugene Onegin that we hear, I am fond of friendly conversation and a friendly glass or two, at dusk or entre chien et loup, as people say, without translation. That one in French, terrible French that I have, in Spanish would be entre perro y lobo. Deutsch, how Deutsch would be zwischen Hund und Wolf. Entre cow y lobo, Portuguese, or in Russian, между собакой и волком, between dog and wolf. Who is the dog herding the cattle and who is the wolf hunting it? I cannot tell, not then, not now. Translation, as Boguslawski said from Tampa, that interview and that day is a very strange beast indeed. So today, thanks to Litquake, Two Lines Press, Cuentero Productions, we are together to celebrate that same spirit that inspired and continues the work of people like Sokolov, Boguslawski, and countless other pairings of writers and translators, and what they do till this day to keep translating the untranslatable. So we'll get to hear from some of the translators of, for example, Mónica Ojeda, the acclaimed Ecuadorian writer, who normally writes in Spanish and is being translated by Noelle de la Paz, who's here. Give it up for Noelle. We also have a translator of Adela Greciano, writing in Romanian, being translated by Monica Cure, who also is here. And we'll get to hear from a voice actor who gave life to Yasuko, the narrator and protagonist of Hako no Oto, which you'll understand what that means in Japanese, Amanda June. Give it up for Amanda. Okay, we'll get to learn from every experimental and artistic jump that has happened, from original text to a translation in a different language to an audio adaptation, and now shared with you all on the stage. And let's do some introductions. I know you just heard the names, but I'm gonna read some bios. Noelle de la Paz is a writer, artist, and translator from San Francisco, living in NYC. She was an emerging Surface B Fellow at the Poetry Project, and her work appears in the Seven Wave, Canyon Review, Southwest Review, The Recluse, the anthology Through the Night Like a Snake, and as part of the exhibitions Always Obscured, Erasure in Body and Text, and Boulevard of Ghosts. Good up and welcome, Noelle de la Paz. All right. Monica Cure is a Romanian-American poet, literary translator, and dialogue specialist, currently based in Bucharest. She is a two-time Fulbright grantee and has a doctorate in comparative literature from the University of Southern California. Her poems have appeared in journals such as Poetry Northwest, Poet Lore, and Grey Wolf Lab, and her poetry translations have been published internationally in Canyon Review, Modern Poetry in Translation, Asymptote, and elsewhere. Her translation of the novel The Summer My Mother Had Green Eyes by Tatiana Chibulek, that's a Moldovan writer, will be published in January by Deep Vellum. Give it up for Monica Cure. All right, and then we got Amanda June, is a New York City and Los Angeles-based musician, trauma-informed educator, audio producer, and creator of cat-themed culture podcast 6 Degrees of Cats, not at all associated with Cat Center of the Art of Translation, but you know, coincidences, synchronicities. Nazareno's audio production career was launched in 2018 when she was one of 10 people selected from 18,000 applicants into Spotify's Podcast Accelerator program for women of color. Since then, she has produced the award-winning independent podcast 6 Degrees of Cat on culture, history, and nature, directed education at the Podcast Academy that hosts the Ambis, and written for outlets including Good Tape magazine. Nazareno currently consults on multimedia production, volunteers for youth, mental health, startup OK So, and records and performs with her post-punk rock and roll band, Lettered. Give it up for Amanda. All right. So I think that before we get into some questions, here's how it's going to go. We're going to go into 3 different adaptations that we've created with our partners, Center for the Art of Translations, Two-Lines Press. And what we're going to do is I'm going to have each one of them intro what we're about to hear. So we're going to start with Noelle. Noelle, do you mind introducing Soroche by Monica Ojeda?
Can you hear me now? Okay. So Soroche is a short story by the Ecuadorian writer Monica Ojeda, and it was co-translated between me and my co-translator Sarah Booker, and was included in the Through the Night Like a Snake anthology of Calico Press, or Calico series of Two Lines Press. And yeah, is there anything else I should add?
I think that was perfect. The thing is, you're not going to hear the most horrifying parts of this story. You're just going to hear, fortunately, another segment that has some interesting interplay by one character called Karina. That's the one note I'm giving. Thank you so much.
It's true that Anna wasn't talking much, that she cried at night and looked somewhat lost during the day. That she didn't eat or laugh at our jokes, that she locked herself in the bathroom for long stretches of time. But dear, we didn't know she was having such a hard time. How would we? We aren't in her head, and we aren't psychologists. It certainly was a delicate moment for her. That's why we told her people would forget about the video, even if it wasn't true. People in our circle don't forget that kind of thing. Anna will be able to return to her normal life, of course, and no one will stop talking to her or anything. She'll still be the vice president of the neighborhood association and the director of the church choir. She'll still be invited to parties and meetings. No one will take away her position or social status. What I mean is that, at least in appearance, everything will go on as before. The problem, dear, is that Anna knows, and we know, that no one will ever look at her the same way. No one will respect her or believe in the image she sold us of herself. It's too late, we've seen the truth. From now on, people will pity her most of the time, and that's terrible for a woman. I feel sorry for her. I suggested we take a trip together because I feel so bad for her, or as Nicole says, out of commiseration. Anna was definitely on board from the beginning. Anyway, we checked into a nice hotel, took a walk around the historical center, and ate dinner at one of the city's traditional restaurants. The altitude tired us out quickly, but it wasn't anything out of this world. We woke up early the next morning because that's what Viviana's plan dictated. She decided the views were worth climbing a ways up the mountain. "Let's go hiking," she said. If they'd asked me, I would have chosen a tall building with an elevator. Ha! Exploring in high heels is very in. Viviana always boasts about being in shape. It's part of her personality. I don't know what she'll do when she realizes she's no longer a pretty little thing, and that we've all noticed the work she's had done. Anyway, we climbed the mountain, chatting about random things about the Zumba instructor, the corps, our kids, upcoming parties, and above all, avoiding any mention of the video. But it was there. Just like the soroche. As I said before, we all felt a little off because of the altitude, but we were fine. Dear, I know Viviana says she felt like she was going to die, but that isn't true. She was happy with the excursion. It was later, on the mountain, when we all got sick. We followed the trail and enjoyed the landscape, which was lovely, just like the one I describe in my book. And I'd never been on a mountain, but I have good imagination. I confess. I've considered writing about what happened to Anna. A novel, perhaps, with a character inspired by her. I think I'd know how to transmit her anguish and her misgivings, because, and anyone who knows me will tell you this, I'm tremendously empathetic. It's one of my distinguishing features. Anyway, while we were climbing, we realized we were up pretty high. And that's when someone, I think it was Nicole, said she was feeling strange. It's possible Viviana was also feeling sick, but given that she likes to brag about her resilience and physical fitness, she didn't tell us. I, on the other hand, said my head was heavy and my arms felt like liquid. We kept walking anyway. I don't know why. I suppose it was for Anna because we'd already spent an hour climbing uphill. I'm sure she also had soroche, which made her see what she saw. It isn't like Anna went crazy, she just lost it for an instant. Things happen. Sadness and lack of oxygen can't cloud one's thinking. You can't judge her. It was the altitude. You see, dear, I'm all empathy.
So very insidious, horrifying. I promised something last time that we premiered and we had that story, and all the horrible, horrifying parts were just for one night only. And it's worth it to at least one time listen to it, because sometimes we're very uncomfortable with what's happening right now in our country, but we're not uncomfortable with things that we should actually be deeply uncomfortable with, that happen also on a daily basis, and that story talks about that. So I'll just say that. Here's a question, which is, Noelle, there's this word soroche that we were seeing behind us, and some people might not be familiar with this Andean word. How did you encompass so many aspects of that in a language that it is a colonial language, right? English, from an indigenous language being Quechua? Where is that? But that's where the word is coming from. So it's like a two-parter. How did you use soroche, and how did you translate it into English?
Yeah, no, I love this question. And, we retain that as the title. Oftentimes a piece will have a translated title, but, Sarah has worked with Monica, and so we had talked about it. And, this is a short story that was part of a collection that deals with the Andean landscape. It deals with lots of kind of, different takes on horror, or different discomforts. And I think that with this particular, we knew that we wanted to keep the title in the original language, so soroche. And the opening line of the story actually kind of goes on this, it kind of explains what it is, and it has a list of different names. Like, people call this lots of different things. And so we were able to get the rhythm and kind of the different naming. So it's like, some people call it, you can call it altitude sickness, air sickness, sickness from the mountains, sickness from the highlands. So kind of went on this kind of listing of all the different ways to say it, which I think gestures to the fact that it, in both Spanish and in the English translation, you have to name a bunch of different things to try to circle around what is encaptured in its original form, which is very, it's in Quechua and it's based in the landscape. So, all the ways you try to translate it, you got to do a list of it, in multiple languages. So I think that, I love this question. I think that that's something that we talked about from the very beginning, with the title and the opening lines being about that. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. One thing that I wanted to ask you is, I know that this was a translator team, and often, there's writer and translator, but in this case, you divided yourselves into, I think you translated 2 characters, and then Sarah Booker translated 2 characters. Which were the characters that you translated, and how did you, in many ways, Spanish and Spanish from the Andes and Spanish from the Andes in people that are like so insidious sounds very specific. How did you still encompass those idiosyncrasies in English for the 2 characters you translated?
Yeah, so there are 4 characters total, and so Sarah took 2 and I took 2, and then we switched and we gave really detailed kind of feedback. And so part of this is, I leaned on Sarah's experience and expertise as a translator. I'm more of an emerging translator when we got together, and so that was definitely in our multiple comments in our shared document. But I think that, there is this other play of, altitude sickness kind of looking down. And so there's a class aspect that runs through this. And so, I love how also in the sound portion of the translation, you can kind of hear like the click clack of the high heels. There's different ways that we, for example, the difference between, is this person who, part of their body unshaved or unwaxed? Like we do like different kind of things that may signal certain class things. But I think that it was really just, I think of translation as kind of an experience of time. It's a time-based experience. It's like every sentence is kind of like a room that you like go in and you kind of look at how it's constructed. And it's, on the page you might read a sentence in real time, and you get the understanding, but to translate is really to kind of be in there and sink into every part of it. And so part of that was triangulating all these different, like the meaning of the word, the way that Monica writes and how to get that feel, the different word choices and how they might signal things like class or things like specific regional kind of observations. And so that was really just really getting deep into the deep read of the text as being part of the translation process.
I think that the subtext is very explicit in the way that you translated the English. The last question I have for you is specifically about Andean mythology. And of course, there's no monolithic indigenous people in the Andes, and especially in countries like Ecuador and Colombia, they happen to be one of the most respected, even though, that's saying something. When you look at El Condor, right, like the Andean condor, when you look at different elements of the Soroche, how are you able to capture and in many ways represent, I think, in a way that was respectful to both the indigenous peoples and also you were being truthful by these 4 characters that are of the higher class and 3 of them are very insidious. Like, how are you able to still be truthful in both of those regards?
Yeah, I mean, I think that has so much to do with Monica and her storytelling and really us, that it was in the text, And I think also I can't think about this story without thinking about the rest of the collection. And because it is very much like short stories that deal with the Andean landscape and the mythologies in very contemporary ways. And there's lots, because there's so many different stories, it's a different angle. So you are able to get a rounded view that both encapsulates Monica's experience as a contemporary person who's from Ecuador, and also, I think that a lot of times when there are discourses about indigeneity and kind of mythology and folklore, it doesn't always get carried over into the contemporary sense in ways that it's ever present, right? So it's also weaves in and out of contemporary life, urban life. It's not all something that just exists in the past and in a particular landscape that we think of as indigenous or full of nature. It is woven into, I think, the fabric in Monica's work and in that collection in particular. And so I think Sarah, having worked with Monica's work and really us bonding over being fans of Monica's work and just being very attentive to what she has put on the page in Spanish and trying to stay true to some of that when we bring it into a different version, which is in English, which is obviously can capture only so much because it is we were talking earlier about translation, but the translation is the same story or the same piece, but every single word is a different word. And so that kind of, that dichotomy or that, I don't know if that's the right word, but that kind of tension is what I think I love about translation, what so many of us love, that we can really engage with things that might seem opposite or the tensions between those things. So
that tension is the word is sublated and synthesized in a very beautiful way in the story, and of course in a very horrifying way too. One thing that I wanted to also say is I think Monica's work, and you both, Sarah and yourself, did a really incredible job of bringing in the past and making it more than anything. A lot of people think of indigenous peoples in Latin America and around the world as the past when it's been past, present, and probably future. So that's fascinating to see how much of that is rooted in the story. Thank you so much, Noelle. Give it up for Noelle. Now we're going to go into another interesting tension that happens in a different calico collection, which is called Chigari Panamina, and it's Cigarettes Until Tomorrow. Monica translated a really beautiful poem, and you're never going to hear the word tree or kopak ever again in the same way. And Monica, do you mind introducing that poem?
Yes, so the poem Kopak, or Tree, is by Adela Greciano, and it comes from a collection of hers called Words Are Also a Province. And in that volume, there's the poet's alter ego, Adila, and there's certain characters that keep appearing, and one of those characters is Gabby. And she shows up in this poem as well. And it's a lot of meditation on the nature of language, as she's also feeling marginal. She's from the provinces. She's not from Bucharest. There's that tension of the capital and what's outside the capital. So it leads to such interesting reflections on what it means, what meaning itself is, and how that gets decided. Who gets to decide what something means? And it's part of this beautiful anthology of contemporary Romanian poets which each poet has a different translator, so I love the variety of voices that you get to hear in the collection as well, in the anthology.
A poem by Adela Greceanu, translated by Monica Cure, read by Alexandra Stoica. Copac, tree. People want to be friendly. They care about why you haven't come by for days to buy water from the store next to the building. They invite you over for coffee. They entice you with crepes, and they promptly lecture you if you miss yourself. Moreover, when they say tree, copac. Copac? Copac. 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 They assume it always means the same thing. And at the speed of everyday life, it really does. But when things start to move at a much greater speed, tree always means something else. And you realize that in order to say tree, copac, 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 copac. You'd have to say where it grows, ar trebui să spui unde crește, what kind of leaves it has, what kind of flowers, how tall it is, if anyone's sitting under it, so on and so forth. And not even if you've said all this, not even if you've written a novel, can you claim that you've really said tree. Copac. 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 Copac? Maybe my deskmate knew that tree can't be said. Poate colega mea de bancă știa că nu se poate spune copac. Și de aceea, and that's why at the end of the letters she'd send me, she always wrote her name in quotations. Gabby! Gabby. Gabby? Gabby. Gabby. Spelled with a Y and with 2 dots over the Y.
It's such a meditation, right? It's such a beautiful act of presence. Yeah, it always gets me. It's beautiful. Let's start with the very basic one, which is, what layers do you think the audio, the music, and the repetition of copac and other aspects of the Romanian language added to that poem you translated?
I think you've asked the main question. The first time I heard it, it really almost brought me to tears, because for me, as a translator who's also bicultural, to add the Romanian in there, it felt like my whole process of translating was somehow visible, and that everything that goes into, I mean, really, I feel like I translate with my whole life. It was all of a sudden I could see that. I was able to experience it outside myself, made tangible. So it was a very, very special experience. And then the other level, of course, is in the poem with the questioning of what does language mean, and the experiencing of language. I think also every time I hear the word copac, or when I read the word copac, I think of my experiences with the Romanian word copac, and how there's just all these different layers, exactly as the poem was saying, where we think we know what a word means, but really it's the sum of all of our experiences, as well as the experiences we haven't had when we come across the word. And then I also love the nature sounds that was there, because I think it really, of all the words that Adela Greceanu could have chosen to explore them, there are several words that she kind of explores throughout the collection, but the nature element of it, and how nature is something that is so integral to who we are. We're a part of nature as well, but we see ourselves outside of it, or it sometimes becomes this kind of abstract thing, but bringing the sound, the nature sounds into the performance just brought it so much closer to the experience of thinking about the word. So I loved both of those. They were incredibly meaningful.
One thing that is beautiful about the nature sounds is that we had an actual producer that is based in Bucharest, Mara Maracinescu, who actually was field recording a bunch of those sounds. So it's not just like Foley sounds, it's actually deep audio producer going and like getting sounds of trees. So that's just something else that I wanted to add there. So I'm really appreciating that. We also had the chance to have one of my favorite Romanian poets, Romanian Alabama poets, Alina Ștefănescu, who was a consulting producer for the project as well. And she provided a lot of really great notes for this one. And I think, hands down, and I talked to Leslie and other folks from the Center for the Art of Translation, that poem specifically always grabs us. The rest of them are incredible too, and they're very different, but that one is just like such a beautiful poem. One question I have with you about Gabi. Gabi is an intertextual element we decided to add to a poem because the poem doesn't have Gabi. If you look at the actual poem as it's published, Gabi is nowhere to be found, but we knew that Gabi is the friend that is being mentioned in that poem. What do you think about intertextuality, not only in terms of how we added that, but in general and between, for example, the different languages coming in together with the intertextuality in that way, or even with Gabi coming in?
So I think, wow, I'm trying to now separate the pieces. So what was the part that was added?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, when she says the quotations, she says 2 dots over the Y, you know that it's Gabi that she's referencing, but she never names Gabi in the way that we did it of like adding Gabi.
Yes,
so like that's
yes. I love that because it just creates the world that I felt was so natural. So the character of Gabi in another poem, the narrator is the first person is wondering why she signs her name in this very strange way. So Romanian doesn't have the letter Y. That's not a Romanian letter. It would just be Gabi, G-A-B-I. But she's chosen to write it G-A-B-Y, and the 2 dots, that's kind of like the umlauts over the A, which again is also not Romanian. And you just get this feel of, it's her way of setting herself apart in a way that's not about anything else other than you don't get it all. You can't know fully who I am. And so the different ways that our name appears, I think really just highlights this desire to also be known, but also to say, but there's always more. And every instance of interaction is only part of that story.
That's exactly where I wanted to go, which is, if you look at completeness or language is only, for humans at least, and I'm not speaking about other sentient beings that use communication and interspecies communication. Humans, we use a symbolic level of language. It always is presupposed on meaning and on culture and on inheritance. My question for you is related to that sense of completeness. When you hear Adela talking about Copac or talking about anything, is that there's never going to be a way of knowing everything about anything. What is that quest for you? Is that the same kind of quest for you?
As a translator, I think it's very related. And knowing that as I'm trying to find the equivalent of the words that I'm translating, it's never going to be that exact word in the same way. Even in the same language, you're never going to know exactly what that word is. But that's, I think, the beauty of language and the beauty of being human, is that continual search for meaning and that continual expression, ultimately, of self. And that's why AI will never replace us.
Ouch, it's true. I would say give it up for Monica. Okay, now we're gonna go into our third hako no oto, which means husband in a box. It's a Japanese whimsical tale. I don't want to tell you much because the clip is gonna tease a lot of good stuff, but I want Amanda to tell you a little bit about it before we get into it.
This is such a surreal piece, and I don't know if I want to spoil it for you, but it's very much husband in a box is a translation for haka no oto, which is interesting too. I can't explain the characters, but it's not a literal translation of that language. And you're following Yasuko, the narrator, who's experiencing a true transformation for her life and very literally for her husband. And it's very interesting to see kind of this role that she's been put into and how she's internally processing that. So I think I will leave it at that, if you have anything else to add.
Roll clip.
I'd never actually seen him move that way. One day, several months before, I'd gone to the supermarket while my mother-in-law was out at her lesson in no chanting. When I came home, I went around to the garden to pick some shiso leaves for dinner before going inside and saw something moving under the big cherry tree in the southwest corner. At first, I thought it was a large mouse or maybe a small dog. Then it scampered across the garden, up over the veranda, and into the living room. A distance of about 8 yards, but the creature crossed it in no time. It seemed to be jumping above the ground, rather than crawling. I picked up my shopping bag and hurried into the living room to find my husband in his usual position, not the slightest bit out of breath. "Did you see something come in here?" I asked.
No.
He replied, his back turned. I went around to face him. "Are you sure?" I asked suspiciously. He was avoiding looking me in the eye, yet the muscles in his face were quivering. Not in anger, though. He seemed to be trying not to laugh. His shoulders were moving slightly up and down. He then waved me away, so I didn't press the matter, but I am sure it was him.
Creature, cat, rat, demon, husband, baby. So many different things. Hopefully I teased you enough so that you can listen to the rest of it. Amanda, you had the Herculean task of being both the narrator and the protagonist. And often when you're telling a story, you're narrating. But in this case, you were both performing and narrating and having to switch that in your brain and also record both things. How did you do that?
Thanks to your wonderful direction, Camilo, and Laura's, of course. It's interesting to kind of deconstruct that process because, there's a cognitive element to how we process information and how we tell stories. And you're always you're always thinking about the audience. So when you're narrating to yourself, you're almost processing it internally for your own understanding. And so that's one side of narration and storytelling. But then when you're also expressing and performing the scene, especially to an audience, a listener, that's a different code switch, if you will. So I think it was being conscious of that, as well as just really authentically responding to just the very unique, surreal experiences that Yasuko was experiencing. Yeah, so there's definitely this triple consciousness going on.
Very meta, for sure. And I think that the story really gets to that. One element in the story that we can talk about in terms of themes, that it is a story called Husband in a Box, especially the first part, husband. Husband is kind of an honorific title in that story. And there's a lot of interesting, very complicated, and at the same time simple patriarchal ways in which the mother-in-law of Yasuko is defending the husband, like her kid, who she considers a baby and might be a baby. So what are some of the interesting things that you think about the themes of the story that you were able to reflect? And we were chatting about it earlier, but you start the story and like there's kind of like a lot of life in Yasuko, and then at the end there's a lot of things that happen, of course, that change her as a character. How are you able to like also even change that with just your voice? Because that's the other thing. You don't have the other, tools at your disposal. It's just your voice, but you changed it radically. How are you able to do that?
Well, I'm very fortunate to have lived in Japan for 5 years. I'm not ethnically Japanese, but I really could empathize with Yasuko's experience because I'm sure every translator and person who speaks multiple languages knows you literally become somebody slightly different in different languages. Even, for example, the way we're sitting. I mean, my ankles are crossed. I mean, crossing your legs, I was told very quickly, you don't cross your legs if you're a woman on stage or in general. Like, you cross them at the ankles. And I think the performance of being the daughter-in-law is not, I think this is not unique to Japanese culture at all. But it was, I love my mother-in-law, she's wonderful. I think that, as you were saying, there's very specific traditions and roles. So this is a kind of a surreal folklore-informed short story. And I could really hear some of the acceptance that this protagonist had of her role, being married into this family with its own culture, its own traditions, the roles that they were expected to take, and certainly the transforming how she sees herself as the leader in her relationship with her husband versus the stark reality of her very surreal situation, and also the relatable elements of that power struggle with who's running the household. So I suppose the authentic inflection of my voice was just really processing that throughout, It was a good story, it was a great translation as well, that really helped.
I agree, and the other element that is interesting is when you were having to be speaking in Japanese, there were like elements that were intentionally in Japanese. I can tell you a couple of examples that I'm thinking about right now. For example, when Yasuko is in the supermarket and grabbing certain ingredients, we wanted to name those in Japanese, and of course the translation doesn't have it in Japanese, but we wanted to incorporate some of those elements. How did you feel that the Japanese being included enhance your performance, or what did it do to it?
I think it really just puts you in that place. And I mean, I think as our panelists, have shared, there's so many words that are untranslatable. Even hearing the way a word sounds summons the image. It lives in a different place in your body and in your mind. So I think it was really effective. And I think you'll have to refresh me on some of the words, but some of them just are not translatable. They're not, depending on if you're from the United States or from Europe, some of those items just aren't used. So I thought that was very effective and also just very critical to the truth of the story.
Give it up for Amanda. Now we're going to have a little bit of a discussion between the four of us, and then we want to also open it up for questions from the audience. So you will have an opportunity for doing that. I'm going to ask one, and we were chatting about it just before. I had read a piece earlier this week on the New Yorker, and it was about how much translation is a phenomenological act. I'm going to break it down for the non-philosophical. It places you in time and in space, and it's about interpretation of an experience. It's something that is accessible to us. And when you hear different languages, when you sense that, you have a different experience. With the three of you, and it can be about the stories themselves or like any other element of your life, code switching even. How do you feel like the movement between languages or literatures brings you into a space of meaning? Big question.
Well, I think there's many ways to answer this question for sure. But the first thing that comes to mind is the literal physicality of, for me, Romania and America. And whenever I'm translating, I could be translating, visiting my family in Detroit, and all of a sudden with the Romanian, I'm back in Bucharest. I'm back in the place where I hear the language and where that was said and where I understand those experiences. So I feel like when I translate, it brings those two far apart places together at the same time. So it almost kind of bends time and space in that way that I'm able to inhabit them kind of at the same time. And I, again, loved how that I got to experience that in the piece that you created, because it was literally happening at the same time. And it also slowed down the experience of, just reading the English. It complicated it in a really true way to my experience of translating, to have all these things that kind of pop up. All these little side tangents where when I'm translating, sometimes I'll have to think of, where else have I seen this word, all the different instances and all the different possibilities and how that works together within the sentence in English. So it just slows everything down as well for me.
Yeah, I think we were chatting about this earlier, and I mentioned kind of the time aspect, like for me, like going into a story to translate it, it's just spending a lot of time, like literally spending a lot of time in there. But I think what's great about, and I love this panel and the fact that we have this other layer with like the audio production of it, but there's something with space that we were saying, on the page, it's very much, I think I experience it like it's on the page and then it's like in my up here. And then the nature of the story, which when you all take a listen, was very bodily. But I think when something about like hearing it, right? I feel like it lifts off the page and is kind of surrounding because, and especially, I've experienced it in theaters both times. And there's something about, it's almost because I've been so in it in my head, and then all of a sudden it's out, and we're all sharing this experience. I think that it, is really interesting to see how the layer of translation that the audio brings. And I think that really, to me, obviously is a durational kind of like experience, but like the space is, I think, so much of what's added in this layer. So I want to shout that out. It's amazing to hear the production of the audio and also the things that are not words, right? Like the sonic kind of elements that are not on the page, but are here kind of in the space with us when we listen together.
I love that you created that segue because that's what Camilo and I have in common is the audio production side, and I just love the sound design. That was our first time hearing that clip, by the way. Camilo deliberately kept that from me. So speaking to the performance, when you're performing, you're always, especially with things from the page, you're competing with the reader's internal interpretation. So I'm sure this is this has been documented often, but with works in art or in books, there's always like a beloved character that somebody's brought up in their head. So it's always interesting as a challenge for me to think, how does this serve the piece? And then what do I translate out of it? And then what really is authentic within that? It's not just personal to me, because I certainly with our piece could think, wow, that was really relatable in certain ways, but this is Yasuko, not Amanda. And so, yeah, I think that the audio lifts and brings out a lot of the really beautiful nuances and the emotionality that the words have like set up for it. Yeah.
I have one last question, and then we can go into questions from the audience. The beauty of what we heard today is that it's unbound, right? Like it started in someone's brain and it got translated from someone else's via telepathy, which is translation. And then it became audio and now it was shared on the stage. What do we gain from being unbound?
I think we get what the essence of culture is. I think really, and as I think I was hearing you talk about the performance here tonight in the theater, I'm never going to read my own translation again in the same way, even though it was mine. It's now different because of Camilo, because of the artist who worked on it, and also because of tonight, because of what just happened here in this room. And that is the essence of culture, the way that we build something together and the way that everything that we create then continues in that unbound way.
Yeah, that was very beautifully said. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And there's something, I guess I'll just add that I think the idea of unbound, right? It's kind of like allowing it to kind of cross different, actually like real and not real and made up, and like those thresholds between like what's on the page versus what's in our mind versus what's in our ears. I think it does something to me that I think it reminds us that actually like language is actually, we're trying to capture experience, and it's an imperfect, it's what we use, but it is a remove from actual culture and experience. And like it's like we're following it, we're trying to capture it. And then so in a way, in the spaces that it has to cross when it's being translated, it kind of goes back into the untouchable or the unexplainable, So in a way, the unboundedness of it is actually maybe in some ways closer to the essence. And every time we kind of try to put it in a translation, put it in an artifact of experience, it creates an access point, but it is, it's not itself. It is it's an expression of it, whatever it is, it.
Yeah, plus a million to what everybody said. And I think we were talking as well about just the nature of language. It's creative, it's generative. None of us experience a single word or how we hear things the same. We have a common understanding that we have a general meaning. And to go back to philosophy, that shadow of ideas, was that Plato or Socrates? I forget. But thank you. There's a philosophy guy. And I really, what I really think is important, and not to bring AI into it, but I'm in San Francisco, okay? I heard about how those AirPods are being developed to live translate. And I think that's 2%, not even, of what truly is expressed through language. And it's the voice, it's the intonation, it's the context, and it's also how we process and respond to and create actively. Like as I'm speaking, I'm creating. So I think that's what unbound means to me. And that's what I think humanizes this art. So to bring it back to this unbound theme, I'm very honored to be on this panel with all of you. Such a great piece.
All right, let's open it up for questions. Leslie and I think and Casey are gonna have the mic, and any question that you might have for any of us, we're more than happy to answer.
It's your question. Hi, thank you so much. This was so wonderful, and it's very lovely to go into this niche part of my mind that I, live. It's like a part of my lived experience, but to think about it from this technical or strategic perspective is really cool. And as you describe searching for these words, it feels like there's a bit of a frenzy going on, and almost like a worry. And I think about the purpose of looking for the right words, and I guess I'm relying heavily on my lived experience as a reference point, where your words sort of highlight that. And I'm thinking about, is the purpose of this for the type of person who may not have a second language, a monolingual? I don't know if that's a word, but is it for them? Are we searching for the words for the person who may not have too many reference points or in like their lived experience to sort of make parallels? Or is it for, I guess it should be for everybody, I imagine, but does that question make sense?
I can try, and maybe this isn't quite where you were going, but a major issue in translation is about the kind of too perfect translation, where it reads as if it was written in English. That's kind of a common compliment for translation. But really, it's a little problematic because part of the beauty of translation is you get to access something that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. And I think that's why these this sound art, I don't know what you term it, that's how I view it. It allows you to have both at the same time. You both have access to the literal meaning, but also the understanding that it comes from somewhere else. And I think that's very valuable to both have that comprehension and then to feel like it is for you, but also to have the understanding that it's more than that.
So what are the things that you're thinking about when you're trying to finalize your draft? How do you know when you're done?
Yeah, I think that is the question. But I think sometimes, I enjoy the co-translation process just because there's, I think translation, you're already with the author, as a translator, and then to have a co-translator, it's just, I think a lot of our process was we were able to have another person in there to check. And I think that, if Sarah and I did this project today, it would be not the exact same translation. If another translator did it, it would not be the exact same translation. And I think, I think versions, specifically translations, like versions, I think are great because there's, when there's a published translation, sometimes it's like, well, this is now the version in English, depending on also like if that text is like a really big canonical text or something, and then what can you offer for another translation has to be kind of, now it's a different time, or now, but I just think every translation kind of is a product of its moment that it's made. So I guess in a technical or practical sense, sometimes it's done because there is a deadline. It's time, we've worked on it a lot, we trust that we've put our due diligence, and now is the time for it to go to print. And so, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I want to second kind of the importance of time. And when you do have more time, which usually for poetry, I have more time to kind of let it sit and then come back to it. One way that sometimes for me is when it feels done is when I sense, of all the different choices that I've made, it comes to a place where I feel there's some kind of internal unity, that the different choices I've made all kind of click together because they were, in many ways, I could have translated any one of those words, but there's a coherence that I feel like makes me feel like I'm at least close, if not there, to the version that I feel like I want to put out in the world.
Yeah, we have time for one more question. So I saw that hand first. Also, that seems to be the consensus. A lot of people pointed over here. So good looking out, I guess.
Hi, thank you. This is really wonderful and echoing that lived experience situation. I think I have to translate sometimes just in my daily life, and I'm also a filmmaker, so sometimes I make films in other languages, and I have to translate those films. I think one of the things that I struggle with, and I think many people do, and I guess it's a question for you translators, is how much creative license do you take in terms of interpreting something? Because as you mentioned, you are essentially you're trying to stay true to the material, but essentially creating something new. And I'm curious if you can talk about maybe your decision-making, how far do you push it to get not a technical translation, but really at the heart or at the feeling of what's being said or what's being expressed in the piece?
I'll take a first stab at it. I feel like I'm not trying to be faithful to a text when I translate. I'm trying to be faithful to the voice I hear in my head when I read the text. So in a way, I'm trying to give other readers the experience that I've had as a reader. Sometimes that might mean kind of bigger choices or bigger difference than if I had done a literal translation. Other times it just flows so naturally for me because I'm just hearing the voice as I translate.
We were talking earlier about how, like translation is a creative act. And I think the thing about, you could get a literal technical translation of, like AI could do it. Like, I don't know why AI has come up, boo, so much in this. But I think there is something about, like, it's a creative act. And so, like, a translation that I do will be different than a translation you do, even if it's the same text. And it's okay that me as a creative person, that part of me is in that. Because I think, it's a different version of a story. It would be written by another person, but the act of translation as a creative act, I think there is a not just like a permission, but like, as it's permission, but it's also like a responsibility an imperative, to actually put my creative force into that piece of work. Because I think that the work, the audience will all be, it's another version, right, of it. And I think, I don't know, Sawako Nakayasu has a kind of chapbook that talks, it's called Say Translation is Art, I think. But there's like kind of, and I've taken a workshop with her. She's a wonderful translator and poet, and it's kind of like the idea of like make it better, and not to downplay the author or to try to usurp kind of that power position of like make a better thing. But it's like we are in this creative act, and I think it's just like put yourself in it, And I love that you said that there's that version for you. That the guide is the version or the kind of the voice that you hear when you experience a story. I think that I'm sure every translator has a different kind of version of that, but I love that. I'm going to try to listen to that voice too.
Oh, was there another answer? We can go down. No? All right. Well, let's give it up one more time for our amazing panelists. Thank you so much. This was really wonderful. We've been partnering with Center for the Art of Translation for a few years now, and it's always been great. So thank you to Center for the Art of Translation, Cuentero Productions, Counterpulse, and Medicine for Nightmares, who is selling books in the lobby. Please make sure you stop by their table and get copies of the anthologies that contain the stories you heard here tonight. Please don't forget to give your surveys to Alicia, who is waiting by the door with her envelope. So on that note, thank you so much again.